Europe with or without Muslims, and that is a topic much more engaging with how Muslims and the Muslim presence is discussed in Europe these days, and how actually Europe is imagined through debates on Islam and Muslims who live here. And these discussions are an important part of current identity politics, be it in exclusive or inclusive and pluralist or purist narratives of Europe as a cultural, a social, or a political entity. And I will now argue that debates about Muslims in Europe reveal important aspects of how Europe is understood, maintained, and imagined today. And so I will, in the next couple of minutes, not speak so much about Muslims on this continent, but on how they are discussed. The anti-Muslim demonstrations that have taken place in 2014, end of 2014, and carried on in the beginning of 2015, and still happen in Dresden, but with fewer numbers of people. And when about 17,000, and then the next week about 20,000 people took to the streets of Dresden in these Abendspaziergänge, in these small strolls that were actually inspired by the 1989 demonstrations. A lot of people have been surprised. The media seem to have been surprised. A lot of politicians have been surprised. But as researchers looking at these debates, we could not have been surprised at all. It was actually pretty clear that there is currently forming an anti-Muslim sentiment, and that is not only in Saxony, that is not only in Germany, but it happens in the Netherlands, it happens in the UK, it happens in Scandinavia, in Denmark, in Norway, in Sweden, in Finland, and so on. So this, you could call it a really European, or at least a Western European phenomenon. Pegida was pretty quickly, so let me quickly translate Pegida again, patriotic Europeans against the Islamization of the Occident, right? So this format has been taken over by a Danish group that has then been kind of approved of by the Dresden part of Pegida. And there I found, when I looked at the web yesterday, I found one from Srpska, from Serbia, and there is a Pegida UK department forming, and they had their march in Newcastle in early February this year. So, and there are other groups that you must have heard of, like Geert Wilders with the Freedom Party in the Netherlands. There's the Danske Folkeparti that has, like the Freedom Party, for a whole legislative period, been very important for forming a government in Denmark in that case, even though not really participating in the government, but by approving of a minority government, they have been very crucial and could even play out much more their role than if they would have been in the government itself. So we have now about 15 to 20% in many countries in Europe that are voting for anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, and actually anti-EU parties. We have the real Finns in Finland that are also arguing against or lobbying against Swedes in Finland. So we have, as I mentioned, Danske Folkeparti and so on. We have now the alternative for Germany. So this seems to be really a trend in Europe that we cannot further ignore, I would argue. What I also want to mention in this talk, and that is why I'm speaking about imagining Europe with or without Muslims, because what happens with these narratives of Europe, either as a purist, as a nationalist idea, we also have the counter-narratives to this. And this, for instance, happened when Pegida became covered in the media. A lot of people took to the streets in Dresden itself, but also in other cities that said there's no place for something like that in our city. And these are pictures from Stuttgart, for instance, where also in early January there has been a huge demonstration against anything like Pegida, so to say, preventive, welcoming refugees. And so these demonstrations that also took place in Cologne and Frankfurt am Main and many other cities, in Berlin, of course, as well, they had a different message, and that was a message of a plural Europe, of a plural city of Stuttgart or Cologne or a plural Germany. And so I will quickly look into how these narratives are playing out, and I will start with the more exclusivist, as they seem to be much stronger. Actually, if you Google something like Muslims in Europe or so, and you look at the pictures, it seems that the anti-Muslim groups are much more vocal or visible, let's say, in the internet. It's pretty amazing, actually. And what has happened is that there have been a whole array of websites forming, of networks forming, with the help of the internet. We have people, memes, of course, pictures, caricatures, and themes traveling, and even texts that are arguing against Islam or Muslim presence in Europe. We have them traveling throughout Europe. And if you remember the last decades, there have been a lot of debates that have traveled from one European country to the other. That was, for instance, the Headscarf Debate starting in France, back then when there was no internet really, in '89. There was this debate first, but it took on, and it was actually traveling again. And with the burqa debate, you can really see then that this happened, especially also through the internet. And we have, for instance, you must have heard about the Minaret Ban in Switzerland, and actually this attempt has been, or the text for these Minaret bans has been traveling around, and it has been tried out in Cologne or in by Pro Cologne, a group. It has been tried out in Austria, and then in Switzerland it was really successful then. So it seems that people are exchanging ideas, exchanging, as I said, caricatures and even texts, and then trying it out in different national or regional contexts, and at some point, one of them then picks up and makes headlines. Similarly, 2 years ago, there was a big discussion in Germany about circumcision of boys, especially with regard to Muslims, but then it also touched upon the Jewish issue. And this was also then traveling, but it never, I didn't see it ever anywhere being picked up as much as in Germany, but I know in Sweden it also made some headlines. So here was just one example, Stop the Islamization of Europe, a website, and just showing you a little bit of what people are exchanging in these, and of course the comment sections are always pretty interesting, sometimes also shocking. So here is one. Germans and Japanese were interned during World War II. Now IS has declared war against the Western world. Muslims should be interned until we find out which one of them are IS supporters. I think... that's I took out this comment as well, or it is a post on this website by the administrator, and here there is a discussion, or there's this question asked, is it okay to oppose Islamization at all? And then there are a lot of arguments given for that, and I find it pretty interesting, and this is now a point on how is Europe imagined here if we speak in this anti-Muslim voice. And then immediately Europe becomes Christian. For instance, there are these arguments down here where it says the Quran uses the word hate more than the Bible uses love. I don't want to go into details whether that's true. But what I find interesting is that it's the Quran on the one side and then the Bible on the other side that you have to look at. So, it's not made explicit, but what happens when you do that is that you say, so yes, Europe is actually Christian. And that's why we need to look at what Jesus said, right? So Jesus said, I die for you. Muhammad said, kill for me. So I think you get the point here. Another thing is, what gets conflated in that is Muslims and immigrants. So immigration, illegal immigrants, refugees are very easily put into that narrative. Or you could also say the other way around. You can also follow, for instance, the National Party in Germany, NPD. They just reinvented their anti-refugee and anti-foreigners narrative and just replaced at some points the refugees or the foreigners by Muslims to make it more mainstream compatible. And in this case, that's a recent post, Greece threatens to send jihadists and illegal immigrants to Europe. So what I find interesting is that Greece is somehow not Europe in this case. But anyway. And maybe I will come back to that one. And in the same Stop Islamization website, we have this under attack by Islamic extremists. The invasion has begun. So the invasion is immigrants, refugees, and black seems to mean Muslim as well. So anything that is strange or different or is Muslim or Islam and is part of the Islamization and of the invasion. And what has to be stopped in this invasion is the Islamization on the one hand, and I alluded to that a little bit before. It's also the EU dictatorship. So the EU is part of that. If you look at how Geert Wilders from the Netherlands argues, he also kind of merges criticism against EU elites with his fear-mongering against Muslims. And if you look, I will come to Politically Incorrect, a German website, in a minute. And what they do is often they argue that our politicians, and that would then also be in other websites that would also go for the EU level or politicians at the EU level, is that they would actually promote these minorities and these Muslims, and they would actually sell out Europe by doing that. So that's just another image. Eurabia is one of the kind of slogans for that narrative as well. And here's Politically Incorrect. And I want to go into one more detail of the narrative, and that is the narrative of the demographic threat. And some of you who have heard of Thilo Sarrazin's book might know of that, these demographic predictions for the future of Europe. And in this case, we have this German website that projects in 2050 about 10% of Muslims will live in Germany, or 10% of the population in Germany will be Muslim. And this is something that really goes on and on in these. This is one of the most visible and prominent narratives. Germany 2020, chronicle of a catastrophe. And it's again, so it's first mass invasion or mass immigration, and it's the fertility rate of, and now I have a trigger warning because I find that quite appalling, the next picture, so who doesn't want to see horrible pictures? So that's the other Islamic bombs. So we have two threats in a way. One is bombs implanted by Muslims or by Islamist groups, which in these narratives are one thing, and the other one is the fertility rate. This is a nicer version of it, and I showed you earlier the post on the 2020 projections, and I really didn't. I wanted to share these comments with you because this is something that happens again and again. So you have this prediction in 2020 you will have 10% of the German population being Muslims, and then somebody comments on that. My numbers are different, and then there is a calculation. So 15 to 20% it's much more possible or much more. Wahrscheinlich, whatever, certain. So and until 2020, the now original Germans will diminish, and so on. And we had these calculations with Sarrazin as well. I really love this one. It's similar with the weather. Crucial is not the raw data, but how you feel it. So probably the feeling is much worse than the data, it seems. And this is now where what is the actual argument of these narratives is that here somebody argues, well, the politicians, the legislator should really act up to that. They should really think about these numbers, and they should employ more policemen that can deal with more violence. And so on, and so more domestic violence, more violence on the streets, etc. And also whatever in all kinds of fields that deal with problematic populations, with problematic youth, etc. So it's not only fear-mongering as such, but it's really then also demands for specific political actions. And let me go to one more example that's also a website online. And what I find very interesting is here, so a lot of the things that I told you about now were they actually come as if they were just the prolongation of a nationalist propaganda. So you have the German sections, you have the Dutch sections, you have the Danish and the Swedish and so on, and it all remains very much within the national frame. But at one point, the argumentation goes to the European level, and that's very interesting, I think, because though the argumentation is deeply rooted in a nationalist idea, so we are different from the Danes, or like even the Finns, are very skeptical, the true Finns are very skeptical of the Swedes living within the Finnish territory. But when it comes to the Muslims, somehow we are European. And then we send these arguments traveling around Europe. And Strache from Austria is visiting Geert Wilders in the Netherlands and his colleagues in Germany and speaks at Dresden. Or also Geert Wilders was at Dresden 2 weeks ago, speaking at the Pegida rally. So there is real personal connections, but there's also this ideal kind of ideological or imaginative connection, and that goes to specific events in the past of Europe. Okay, and whenever you say something against, criticize them, they have another narrative, and that is, this is racist. Always when we say something critical of Islam, we are called racists. The other narrative would be, especially on the German part, would be we are against fascism, and we need to be that because of the German past. And this is why we have to protect Jews. So whenever Muslims are doing something against Jews, this will also be used for the narrative. And so this will be used as arguments against the Muslim presence. And so even the nationalist and fascist heritage of Germany is then used and turned. Okay, so and I think I have 5 more minutes or so. 3, 5, good. And I wanted to give you a very few positive or pluralist narratives, examples of that, because I mentioned that in the beginning that there were counter-narratives. And one of the arguments of the counter-narratives is that there has always been, or there has since a much longer time than these anti-Muslim tendencies would argue, there has been a Muslim presence in Europe, and that goes before the Second World War especially. So we have a lot of pictures and stories now excavated from Western Europe, especially from the UK, also from Germany and Denmark and the Netherlands. These are stories, for instance, from the UK, where people then argue, well, they have not only been present on Western European soil, but they also shared our history, like Muslims fighting in the First World War, for instance. And there are similar pictures and stories about Muslims taking part in the Second World War against the Germans. So these are then narratives told, and we have pictures and stories about the graveyards of Muslim soldiers who died for instance, the British Empire in the First or in the Second World War. There has been a huge program running by the British Council telling our shared Europe, the stories of our shared Europe, going into the past like that, but also into the present. And what I find also interesting is that there is a new awareness for stories of Muslims who have been engaged in saving Jews. So this is a story of I think, a woman with Iranian or Persian background in France who was working for the British security service and then was also killed by the Nazis. And this one is sorry for the quality, I couldn't find a better picture online. This is a memory that was just put up 2 years ago for Mohammed Helmi, who lived in Berlin and was a doctor, was himself persecuted by the Nazis, but also helped several Jews to survive, especially as a doctor, giving them treatment when they were living undercover. And last narrative goes back to long-standing European presences of Muslims. This is, for instance, Russian Tatars. Here, Tatars fighting on the side of the Poles against the Swedes. So these Tatars have been living in what is now Poland, Lithuania, and Belarus. For instance, also a few of them have been living in Prussia. And of course, you know the story of Granada, Cordoba, and so on. Then also the story of Spain, of the presences in Greece and in Italy are taken up. And some initiatives are telling stories about how our internet age, our webcams, our mobile phones would not be possible without Muslim scientists. So that is a different level of argumentation. All that we are living on, our world, what it's based on, was also created by Muslims, Muslim scholars. This is a very short film with Ben Kingsley explaining these stories. For instance, here how surgery tools were invented by a Muslim doctor. And this is a very last picture here around. There's also the Islamic Museum, or the Museum for Islamic Art in the Pergamon Museum, which shows how there is a connection between the Muslim past and the European present, and also opening the museum's realms now for actual Muslims who live in this city. So thank you so much for your time, and I think we reached the end. And I don't want to finish this without also saying that I thought talking about these narratives, these very controversial narratives, is one thing, and showing it with these pictures is one thing, but I invited 2 people to join me for the next session in order to discuss these narratives a little bit with live people. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Riem Spielhaus. Thanks for the amazing insights. I don't know, do we have time for one question? Or are there some questions in the audience, even if there's discussion afterwards? Just raise your hand.
Amazing talk, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Have you any idea how those putting it to the European level is beneficial for the several nationalist group? Who's profiting from that?
I think they're all promoting, as I said, when they share, that is of course a big pool, and they really help each other out. With, they serve each other with stories, with narratives, with caricatures. They share them. They visit each other at their rallies. Gert Wilders is a name for people here, and so they translate their articles, their comments, and so it's not, so it's kind of nationalist argumentations that are just transplanted in a way. Yeah, I think this is how, and I would also say that the counter narratives and the narratives, and you can, it's like the egg and the, its mother. You don't know where it started because they all counter each other. And I think even these are beneficial for each other. Because whenever you put out something positive about Muslims and something positive about kind of like the Muslim past in Europe, you are actually feeding them. And they will, for instance, for the film with Ben Kingsley, if you look for it on YouTube, you will find a counter film, and then telling this is all lies and so on. So it's narratives that answer to each other, and they feed and they nourish each other actually, which I find tricky because then you don't know what to do. How can you react to that? And that's actually where we come to in the next session.
Yeah.
How can you get out of that without being funny?
Thank you again, Riem.
Thank you.
Amazing talk. Please.